The snow fell steadily on the winding mountain road, each flake catching the pale afternoon light like tiny diamonds. The towering pine trees stood silent, their branches heavy with winter's weight, creating a natural cathedral of green and white. In this peaceful wilderness, where the only sounds were the whisper of wind through the branches and the gentle crunch of snow underfoot, two very different worlds were about to collide. Victoria Sterling sat behind the wheel of her gleaming black Bentley, her manicured fingers gripping the leather steering wheel with growing frustration. The luxury sedan had been her faithful companion through countless business trips, but today it had betrayed her. Steam rose from beneath the hood like a white flag of surrender, and the engine had fallen silent 20 minutes ago. She pulled her camel-colored wool coat tighter around her shoulders and stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The cold bit at her cheeks immediately, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the frigid atmosphere. Her designer heels sank slightly into the snow, and she realized how utterly unprepared she was for this situation. Victoria had been driving to her mountain retreat, a place where she could escape the constant demands of her business empire. As the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, she was accustomed to solving problems with phone calls and checkbooks. But here, surrounded by nothing but trees and silence, her usual tools felt useless. In the distance, she could hear the low rumble of an engine approaching. Hope sparked in her chest as she saw a red tractor emerging from between the trees, cutting a steady path through the snow. Behind the wheel sat a man in a worn flannel shirt, his weathered hands steady on the controls. This was clearly someone who belonged in this landscape, someone who understood the rhythm of these mountains. The tractor slowed to a stop beside her stranded vehicle, and the man climbed down with the easy grace of someone who had been working outdoors his entire life. He was tall and lean, with kind eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His name was Jake Morrison, though Victoria didn't know this yet. She only knew that he looked like salvation. "Car trouble?" Jake asked, his voice warm despite the cold air. There was no judgment in his tone, no amusement at her obvious distress. Just a simple offer of help from one human being to another. Victoria nodded, suddenly feeling foolish in her expensive clothes and city ways. "The engine just stopped," she said, gesturing helplessly at the Bentley. "I'm not sure what happened. One moment everything was fine, and the next." She trailed off, spreading her hands in a gesture of defeat. Jake walked over to the car and lifted the hood with practiced ease. Steam billowed out, and he stepped back to let it dissipate before peering inside. His trained eye quickly assessed the situation. "Looks like your radiator gave out," he said, his voice matter of fact. "Probably couldn't handle the altitude change. These luxury cars sometimes struggle with mountain driving." Victoria felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. "Can it be fixed?" "Not out here," Jake replied honestly. "You'll need to have it towed to a proper garage. But that's going to take some time, especially with this snow coming down." As if to emphasize his point, the snowfall began to intensify. The flakes grew larger and fell more thickly, creating a curtain of white that seemed to isolate them from the rest of the world. Victoria looked around at the empty road, the endless forest, and felt a flutter of panic in her chest. "Is there a phone signal up here?" she asked, pulling out her expensive smartphone. The screen showed no bars, no connection to the digital world that usually kept her tethered to civilization. Jake shook his head. "Not for miles. But don't worry, I can help you out. My farm is just down the road. You can call for a tow truck from there, and you'll be warm while you wait." Victoria hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help from strangers, especially when she couldn't repay the favor immediately. Her world operated on transactions, on clear exchanges of value. But looking at Jake's honest face and the steadily falling snow, she realized she had little choice. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully. "No imposition at all," Jake replied with a genuine smile. "It's what neighbors do. Besides, this storm's going to get worse before it gets better. You don't want to be stuck out here when it really starts coming down." Something in his tone convinced her. Victoria gathered her purse and a small overnight bag from the car, then climbed up into the cab of the tractor. The interior was warm and smelled of honest work, engine oil, hay, and the faint scent of coffee from a thermos wedged between the seats. As they drove through the snowy landscape, Jake pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area. He talked about the wildlife that called these mountains home, about the changing seasons and the challenges of mountain farming. Victoria found herself relaxing despite her circumstances, drawn in by his easy conversation and obvious love for this place. "You're not from around here," Jake observed as they turned onto a smaller road that led to his property. "San Francisco," Victoria replied. "I have a place up here, but I don't get to visit very often. Work keeps me busy." "What kind of work?" Victoria paused, suddenly uncertain how to explain her world of corporate boardrooms and international deals to this man who seemed so grounded in simpler realities. "I run a company," she said finally. "We develop commercial properties, mainly shopping centers and office buildings." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "That must keep you traveling a lot." "It does," Victoria admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm always moving, always rushing from one place to the next. It's rare that I get to slow down and actually see where I am." The tractor pulled up to a modest farmhouse surrounded by snow-covered fields. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. It looked like something from a Christmas card, peaceful and welcoming in a way that Victoria's expensive mountain retreat somehow never managed to achieve. Inside, the house was warm and comfortable, filled with the kind of furniture that was built to last rather than to impress. Jake's wife, Sarah, welcomed Victoria with the same genuine warmth her husband had shown. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, clearly in the middle of preparing dinner. "You poor thing," Sarah said, taking Victoria's coat and hanging it by the fire to dry. "Jake told me about your car. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll get you sorted out." While Jake called the tow truck on their landline, Sarah poured Victoria a cup of hot coffee and settled her in a chair by the fireplace. The warmth seeped into Victoria's bones, and she found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. "The tow truck can't make it up here until tomorrow morning," Jake reported when he returned. "The snow's getting too heavy for safe driving. But you're welcome to stay the night. We have a guest room that's all made up." Victoria's first instinct was to protest, to insist on finding some other solution. But as she looked around at the comfortable room, at these two people who had opened their home to a complete stranger, she felt something shift inside her chest. "That's very kind of you," she said quietly. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," Sarah replied with a wave of her hand. "We're just glad we can help. Now, I hope you don't mind simple food. I was making beef stew for dinner." The evening that followed was unlike anything Victoria had experienced in years. They ate dinner around a wooden table that had clearly hosted countless family meals, sharing stories and laughter as the snow continued to fall outside. Jake talked about the challenges of mountain farming, about the satisfaction of working with his hands and watching things grow. Sarah shared her love of quilting and her volunteer work with the local food bank. Victoria found herself talking about her childhood, about dreams she had almost forgotten in the pursuit of success. She spoke of her loneliness, though she didn't call it that directly. Instead, she talked about the view from her corner office, about hotel rooms in distant cities, about the strange emptiness that sometimes crept in during quiet moments. "Sounds like you work too hard," Jake observed gently, and Victoria felt a truth in those words that cut straight through her usual defenses. That night, lying in the guest room under one of Sarah's handmade quilts, Victoria stared at the ceiling and thought about the evening. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at peace, so connected to other people. The silence of the mountains was different from the silence of her penthouse apartment. Here, the quiet felt full of possibility rather than emptiness. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed in the night. Victoria woke to the smell of bacon and coffee, and the sound of quiet voices in the kitchen. When she came downstairs, she found Jake and Sarah discussing the day's plans with the easy rhythm of a couple who had been together for decades. The tow truck arrived shortly after breakfast, and Victoria's car was loaded onto the flatbed with efficient professionalism. As she prepared to leave, she felt an unexpected reluctance to return to her regular life. "I want to do something for you," she said to Jake and Sarah. "Let me pay for your kindness." Both of them shook their heads immediately. "We don't need payment," Jake said firmly. "We were happy to help." Victoria persisted, but she could see that her offer was making them uncomfortable. These people had helped her not for reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The realization was both humbling and inspiring. 2 months later, Victoria returned to the mountains. But this time, she didn't drive to her isolated retreat. Instead, she pulled up to the Morrison farm in a practical four-wheel drive vehicle, her trunk filled with groceries and her heart full of anticipation. Jake was working in his garden when she arrived, preparing the soil for spring planting. He looked up with surprise and pleasure as she approached. "I wanted to thank you properly," Victoria said, but Jake waved away her words. "You already did that," he replied. "But it's good to see you again. How's the car?" "Running perfectly," Victoria said with a smile. "But I realized something after I left here. I've been so focused on building my business that I forgot to build a life. You and Sarah reminded me what I was missing." Over the following months, Victoria became a regular visitor to the Morrison farm. She learned to appreciate the rhythm of the seasons, the satisfaction of simple tasks, and the joy of genuine friendship. She started spending her weekends helping in the garden, learning to can vegetables, and sharing meals around that worn wooden table. Her business didn't suffer from her new priorities. If anything, Victoria found that the peace she discovered in the mountains made her more focused and creative in her work. She began to see her company not just as a money-making enterprise, but as a way to build communities and bring people together. The story of Victoria and the Morrison family became a tale told in the surrounding valleys, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable treasures are found in the most unexpected places. It was a story about the power of human kindness, about the importance of slowing down, and about the simple truth that we all need each other, regardless of the size of our bank accounts or the luxury of our cars. And on quiet winter evenings, when the snow fell softly on the mountain roads, Victoria would sit by the fireplace in the Morrison farmhouse, a cup of Sarah's coffee in her hands, and marvel at how a broken-down car had led her to the life she never knew she wanted.